Mary Vincent was desperate to get home. The 15-year-old dancer had run away to get space from her parents' divorce, and after staying with her boyfriend over the summer, and then with her grandparents for a while, she was now intensely homesick. On her journey from Corona, California back home to Las Vegas, she had only gotten a ride to Modesto. Feeling the pavement beneath her shoes, she was walking with 2 other hitchhikers, all holding signs that read, "Going south." After a while, a light blue passenger van approached, and Mary went up to the window to talk to the grandfatherly man. She asked if she and her friends could hitch a ride with him, and he told her he would only take her, not her friends. She was confused as they were all going the same direction. She could also see there was plenty of space in the van. Even still, he insisted he would only take her. She said she needed to get her bag and then went back to explain what was going on. Her friends told her this was a bad idea. She had a bad feeling about him too, but even still, she couldn't bear the thought of waiting for another car willing to take her. It could have taken a few more days, and she was already tired enough. As a result, she ignored her better judgment and decided to go with him. Lawrence Singleton was a man with a drinking problem and a temper on a good day. He had recently gone through a bad divorce, and his daughter fled the state to avoid him. Of course, he wouldn't let his new passenger in on any of this. As they drove off, he introduced himself. He was 50 years old and mentioned he had a daughter around her age. She was relieved that he was so polite and disarming. Her eyes were getting heavy, and she asked him if it would be all right if she dozed off. He smiled and assured her that it was fine. When she woke up, she was shocked to see that they were headed in the opposite direction. Panicked, she demanded they turn around. He calmly apologized and explained that he was just an honest man who made an honest mistake, and promptly turned around. She was still a bit suspicious of him, but she didn't have any good options at this point, and he had turned around. After a while, he told her he needed to go to the bathroom. He simply couldn't wait for the next gas station. He pulled off down a wooded off-road and got far enough that no one would be able to see them. At this point, she began considering her options and realized that one of her shoes is untied. She could outrun him, but she would need to do something about this first. She needed to get out to tie her shoe once they stopped, as there wasn't enough space in the van. They stopped. He got out, and she followed suit soon after. As she bent over to tie her shoe, she felt the hard thud of a hammer from behind. When she woke up, she was in the back of the van, tied up. He got in the back and brutally assaulted her for hours on end. All the while, she quietly begged for him to let her go, and that she wouldn't tell anyone. He spoke to her as if she was his child, completely ignoring her desperate pleas. When he finally got tired, he crawled off of her, went into one of the front seats, and fell asleep for a few hours. Then, in the middle of the night, he woke up and drove off with her still in the back. When he stopped, he stood her up and cut her free, then ordered her to drink an unknown alcohol from a plastic jug, and then began assaulting her again, and the nightmare continued, all while she begged for her freedom. Finally, he walked past Mary to get something from the van. "You want free? I'll set you free." A split second before he made his next move, the destroyed teenage girl saw the hatchet he had retrieved. He grabbed her left arm and cut it off at the wrist. She fell to the ground, still conscious and confused, seeing as she was on the ground, but she was still holding on to him. He ignored the girl's screams as he shook her severed arm free from his forearm. Before she could compose herself, he walked over and grabbed her right wrist. She screamed and kicked him as hard as she could. His iron grip dug into her wrists, and as he swung and chopped her arm 4 times before it too came off. Instinctively, despite being in agonizing pain, she played dead, eyes half open. He then dragged her, threw her 30 feet down into a nearby culvert, breaking 4 of her ribs in the process. She remained motionless even as he stuffed her into the concrete pipe under the freeway, As he left, she heard him say, "Now you're free." Mary, bleeding and naked, stayed in there unmoving for some time, afraid that if she moved, he may be there watching to see if she was still alive. Finally, she mustered the strength to get up and headed towards the sound of nearby cars, holding her arms above her head to try and stop the blood and muscles from falling out. The first car sped off in horror, and the second car stopped to help. They wrapped her in clean linens, drove her to a nearby airport, and called an ambulance. She made it to the hospital and made a recovery, and even got fitted for some prosthetics. Unfortunately, they had to take some of the leg muscle for the prosthetic, and she would never be a dancer. She also gave detailed descriptions to the police. The sketch she helped produce was so accurate that Lawrence Singleton was almost immediately recognized by his neighbor and apprehended by the police. During the trial, Lawrence called her a $10 whore and insisted he wasn't in his car that day, and that it must have been someone else. He was convicted nonetheless, and sentenced to the maximum amount of time they could given the laws of the time and the area, 14 years in prison. On his way out, he whispered to her that he would finish the job, even if it took the rest of his life. He was released on parole 8 years and 4 months later on good behavior, even though his most recent psychiatric evaluation read, "Because he is so out of touch with his hostility and anger, he remains an elevated threat to others' safety, inside and outside of prison." He also continued to claim he was innocent and wrote several threatening letters to the lawyer threatening Mary. He also attempted to sue Mary for burglary and kidnapping, but his case was insubstantial and thrown out of court. Mary and Lawrence's own daughter went into hiding, separately. His daughter had crossed state lines and gotten her name changed multiple times to throw him off her trail. After the attack, Mary became depressed and anorexic and had a hard time going outside. She became very secretive about her location, and her relationships crumbled. She was unable to hold down a job and couldn't even afford to get her prosthetics fixed. She eventually filed for bankruptcy. In 1999, she would state that she hadn't smiled in 21 years. And in 1999, she would go on to meet a man named Tom. After a while, they got married and had 2 kids together. She also joined the University of Nevada and shifted her perspective from victim to survivor. She created successful art and went on to become an advocate for victims, telling her story openly in hopes it would stop people like her from hitchhiking. When Singleton was let go, towns across California refused to let him live there, and there were protests across the state trying to get him to stay in jail. Some of their signs read, "Drop dead, Larry," and "Get the maniac out." As a result, he spent his parole in a trailer in San Quentin under a curfew and watched by guards. He joined Alcoholics Anonymous and claimed to be sober. When his parole ended, he moved back to Florida, his birth state. In 1990, he was arrested for petty theft. He went in on a 2-year sentence and got out shortly after he went in. 10 years after he got out on parole for his crimes against Mary, Singleton paid for a prostitute named Roxanne Hayes and lured her into his home. A painter was walking by and saw him stabbing her to death and called the police. When they arrived, they saw him holding a deboning knife standing over her corpse, covered in her blood. He was arrested, and Mary decided to come testify against him at his trial, even though she wasn't required to. After the story, she told the court he was sentenced to death. In 2001, he would then go on to die of cancer on death row, leaving Mary feeling cheated once again. She was hoping to find something looking into his eyes as he died. The story of Mary Vincent is one of tragedy, but also one of courage, tenacity, and overcoming. She has taken the horrifying loss of both her arms and used this experience to try and make the world a bit safer from the Lawrences of the world. The fact that Lawrence Singleton was released early and went on to kill afterward led to the creation of the Lawrence Singleton Bill, allowing judges to give 25 years to life sentences in cases involving torture, making sure people who would do anything similar wouldn't ever leave prison just to dismember or kill again.